I had a couple people ask what internal modifications you have to make to the injection pump to prep it for adding an LDA. So this is a non-LDA. It's a fake LDA like you find on the eco diesels. See, it doesn't have the lever in there. So this first one is a broken turbo pump, and you'll notice right here, this is the throttle lever. Normally this would go up against the governor like on this guy. So you see that goes up against the governor. Normally this pin comes out and these flyweight wheels are out when it's at idle. Then when you press in, the flywheel weights get pushed in and it accelerates. So you'll notice this pin is missing on the turbo pump and on the one we've modified right there. You need to cut this pin off if you want to add an LDA. Now, it's easier to do if you remove the governor itself, but you can do it without removing the governor by just taking a Dremel, in this case, one like this, and cutting from the governor side, being very careful not to hit the throttle plate assembly or the governor. I had to go down to Ace Hardware and find some specific discs so that they could go deep enough to cut into it. Now, the big issue you're going to find when you do this is do not do this mod to your non-turbo pump until you have the LDA assembly, because as soon as you cut this pin, this throttle assembly can travel much further now. Not a whole lot further, but you can kind of see on this one it's traveling further than this end stop right here. You can see the little end stop right there. It's traveling much further than the pin would normally around it. Right now it would be like halfway into the pin. You can see the end stop right there on this one, how it hits up against the pin. Doesn't let it travel very far. With that end stop removed, it gives you a little more travel. What that does is that, of course, increases the amount of fuel delivered, but it also opens the relief holes. Normally on the non-turbos, it doesn't really open the relief holes, but on the turbo ones, when it travels further, it opens a pressure relief hole that's on the actual piston assembly down at the bottom that we can't see here. So as soon as you remove that pin, it can now travel further. It'll make it really hard for you to run it non-turbo. It'll act a little funnier when you hit full throttle. And while the governor itself should keep it from overrunning, I wouldn't guarantee it. So definitely have the LDA before you do it. The other modification people were asking about is for the actual fuel delivery valves. These guys right here. So in my case, I pulled some valves you can get out of a 1.9 liter pump. If you can find a TDI pump in the junkyard, you can get the valves you need from there. I wouldn't use the ones from a 1.6 turbo diesel unless you're doing it to a 1.6. If you're doing like an MTDI, you need the bigger valves. You do not want the 1.6 ones. The easy way to demonstrate why this is a problem is to look do some simple math. Take 1.9 liters and divide it by 4 in a calculator, and then multiply it by 5 in my case, and you'll see it'll give you roughly 2.35 liters, which is what I needed. If you have a 1.9 motor and you use the delivery valves from a 1.6, you'll come up slightly smaller than the displacement of your engine. You don't really want that. You want matched or bigger displacement to increase fuel delivery. In this case, you've got these little ones. I'll show you what they look like. These are the fuel delivery valves out of a 2.4 liter non-turbo pump. you can see these little cutouts. They're kind of in a triangle shape. That's where the actual fuel slips by when it pulses open. So when the plunger pressurizes, this pushes against the spring that you can see on the inside of this guy. I'll dump one out for you to look at. That's the fuel delivery spring. So this sets the pressure for when the pop valves, these little delivery pop valves, will open. So once the piston delivers enough fuel pressure, it pushes up against this spring. This little thing opens, and these little cutouts allow fuel to pass by. So on the turbo ones, if you look at them, the cutouts aren't flat like this. They're cut deeper, so they look like little ravines cut into it versus these flat spots, unlike this one. That'll allow it to deliver more fuel per pulse. So modification of these is fairly easy. For the most part, you want to use the springs that come in the delivery valves that came out of your pump, because they'll be the correct springs anyways, and you want them to open at roughly the same time. You just remove them, change out the delivery valve itself, make sure you put a crush washer back in at the end, or else it won't work right, or it'll just leak everywhere. This crush washer goes on the back of that guy. You have to just kind of insert the crush washer into the pump before you torque this guy down. Torque this guy down to about 33 foot-pounds into the pump. That'll give you your extra fuel. Now the other thing you might want to do is go find a different plunger and head. So your plunger and head on your injection pump are within this part of the unit right here. So this is a 5-cylinder, but so just ignore that I have 5 on here. But let's say you have a 1.6 pump. The 1.6 is roughly a 9mm plunger, so it's giving you that much delivery of fuel. If you want more fuel, you got to change this whole head along with the plunger inside. So like steal one from a 1.9-liter pump should be a 10mm plunger and head if it's off a manual, or an 11mm if it's off an automatic. And that'll give you more fuel delivery. Other than that, once you've done that, you have to make sure you get the correct governor spring, this assembly. So you have a couple options. You can go steal the governor spring from the turbo pump if you can find it. Barring that, if you can't find it, you can use the shim. You can put shims on here to increase the spring tension to give you proper throttle reaction. If this is not set right, your engine will either throttle up and down really weird, like it'll seem like if you come off throttle, it'll kind of rev down very slowly, or it'll sit at full throttle and the throttle will just be kind of null. So you got to make sure this guy's set right. It's generally going to be easier to do the shimming on this rather than finding the correct one. I was just fortunate to have the correct one. Changing out these springs is pretty easy. If you look at this, you'll see there's a cutout on the center. So what you actually do is you press down this side, that pops out, it clips onto these two little end pieces. You slide this forward until it reaches those cutouts, and out it comes. And that's your governor control arm right there that goes to your throttle lever. Putting it in is the same as inverse. You just make sure that you slide in the little cutouts on the end back into those two grooves, and then once it's in, you see the two little cutouts on the end of this guy. You slide those back onto the two fingers at the front, and that'll hold it in place. That's the majority of the modifications. Everything else is really up to you. Before you disassemble your pump, make sure you index it properly. So by indexing, I mean look at the end of this guy. You see this little notch? If you look at your pump before you take it apart, your notch will there will be lines on your throttle assembly here. On this one, it's all rusty and old. Ignore that. But if there's no lines, take a look at this line, take a straight edge, and carve or cut a line into the throttle assembly up here before you take this nut off. Because the only thing keeping that throttle lever aligned is these little grooves marked into the top of the throttle assembly. You can see them on there right below the threads. Those little grooves, let me see if I've got a throttle assembly somewhere around here. I probably do, but it's probably buried under all the junk. Let's see. Ah, here we go. So here's a throttle assembly. If you look at the bottom of that, you can see there's grooves that match up to the grooves in the top of your throttle lever, right there. So as long as you mark on this side where that line should line up to, you should be good. If you forgot, don't worry, it's okay. First thing you got to do when you put the assembly back together is before you tighten this down and before you set the spring, get this set to idle and get this set roughly to where you think it was. If you don't remember, okay, it's fine. The basic rule of thumb is this throttle assembly is going to be set straight. The goal is to get this throttle lever set where if you turn this guy to about the end, so like this is idle for mine. On the 1.6, idle is over here. This is my full throttle. This is my idle. 1.6, this is idle. This is full throttle. So if you squeeze this guy, you should get free travel until just about under full throttle, and then you'll feel like a catch. You'll feel something catch, and you might hear, if you've got your fuel return banjo bolt off, you might hear a spring compress. You can't really hear it on mine, but you can definitely feel it. It should be loose, 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 and then towards the end, you'll feel it like something caught and like you're compressing something, and then it'll kind of tighten up. What you're actually feeling is this guy getting tugged on, and it's tugging on the throttle assembly as this reaches full throttle. So as this reaches full throttle, it'll run out of space, it'll hit the end of the governor right there, and it'll pull on the springs inside here just a little bit. So it should be nothing, 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 and then you're pulling on your springs at the very end. And then once you've done that, you can start the car. It might be at full throttle, it might be at right below full throttle, and then you can re-index this guy. So loosen it up, turn the throttle assembly left or right, whatever you have to do to let it drop down to idle, and then just play with it until you feel like you're getting good throttle response. And if you're lost, that's a good way to get it back to where it needs to be. Hopefully that helped you guys a bit. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll admit I am a learner at this. My goal mainly was to figure out how to build these so that I can start maintaining my own diesels without having to shell out a lot to maintain them. I don't have a bench to test these on. I test them on my own engines and on my own bench. Obviously, it's a big mess right now. So most of my engines are actually my guinea pigs. So, you know, work at your own discretion, use caution, and don't be afraid to experiment a bit. Just don't run it too rich, and don't run it too rich, or you'll start getting knock, and you'll sound like you have a rod knock, but it's probably just you're getting too much fuel. So work cautiously, but try it out. Good luck.